Hello, and welcome to the 29th episode of the Mike McNair Revolutionary Strategy Series. Today is Wednesday, the 6th of November 2019, and I'm your host, Tom O'Brien. We continue our march through Chapter 8, Political Consciousness, and discuss why we shouldn't just do what the Russians did. This week, I have the new Patreons Mala Branch, Rura Gee, Nigel Walker, Ian Zabo, Will Madhouse, Ryan Stray, Lex Whitfield, Stevie Schmidt, and Paul Hammer to thank. You too can keep the good ship Alpha afloat by joining the Patreon gang for as little as $5 a month, which works out at $1 an episode. Patreons get special bonus episodes, the right to vote on the reading group series, and other cool stuff too. We are closing in on the magic 100 patrons, which means we'll be producing a second Patreon only podcast every month. This week's and last week's episode were both edited by the very generous Mason Kerr. Thanks a million for the help, Mason. If you can't afford the dollars to become a patron but want to support the show, why not help out by taking some of this editing off my hands? Hit me up on Twitter or Facebook if you're interested. Okay, to the discussion. Let's give it over to Kyle.
The Bolshevization of the communist parties and the savage polemics against Kautsky and others over classless democracy, which became part of the common inheritance of official communism, Maoism, and Trotskyism, deeply deformed these movements. In the end, the Bonapartist centralized dictatorship of the party bureaucracy produced kleptocrats in the USSR and the countries that copied it. In the Western communist parties and the trade unions associated with them, it produced ordinary labor bureaucrats with more power to quash dissent than the old socialist bureaucracy had deployed, a feature gratefully copied by the social democratic right. In the Trotskyist and Maoist groups, it produced petty patriarchs and tin pot dictators whose interests in holding on to their jobs and petty power were an effective obstacle to unity. It thus turned out to be in the interests of the capitalist class. Moreover, casting out the renegade Kautsky cut off the communists from the Western European roots of their politics. Lenin and his co-thinkers' transmission of the inheritance of the Second International into Russian politics became Lenin's unique genius on the party question, feeding into the cult of the personality of Lenin and its successors. Perfectly ordinary Western socialist political divisions pre-existing the split in the Second International had to be cast in Russian terms. Communists began to speak a language alien to their broader audiences, the language that has descended in today's trot speak.
I've got two questions to ask people about this when I was reading this. The first one is, what does he mean here by classless democracy and the savage polemics against Kautsky and others over classless democracy? What does that mean?
It's the way that the old Kautskians valued democracy as a social institution, kind of regardless of the class content, even though they wanted like they wanted socialism, right? And they did think of like political like forms and structures as potentially having class content. But the way that Kautskians sort of dealt with democracy, it was as a good, no matter in what context it was coming from. So bourgeois democracy was good, and you wanted to preserve even some of the democratic organs from bourgeois democracy in your socialist transition. There was no such pretension for the Bolsheviks against the provisional government. They wanted to fucking liquidate and destroy those organs, and then we're just going to whip up a new democracy from scratch, right?
Which they never did. I mean,
there were organs, and they were like, you know what? Never mind. This isn't going to work. And you could question the wisdom of that, but like it kind of plays into the Kautskians, argument is that, look, there was like this historic kind of buildup of democratic legitimacy. If you just sweep it away, even for something more radically democratic, that's going to be real easy to sweep away too.
Well, I mean, and the thing is that the final moment of radical democracy never arrived. I want to say something that may shock people, but at the local level, like for example, the DPRK, which is like one of the, it's gotten better.
North Korea.
Yeah, it's gotten better recently because its economy doesn't quite suck as bad. Because believe it or not, Kim Jong Un's been neoliberalizing under the radar that no one's been paying attention to.
No, for sure. The Donju Road.
Right, but like they do have fairly democratic local ordinance bodies, but they're completely subordinate to like a hereditary like communist warrior dynasty caste god thing. I don't even know how to explain.
Okay, so about democracy, what about it?
Well, I mean, the thing is, you can have. My point is, you can have remnants of democracy even in the worst of the socialist systems. It didn't fucking matter, right? Mm-hmm. There are democratic elements to North Korea for real. It doesn't matter. Your options, your democratic options, are between shit and poo. And and it's all within, it's within, on the national level, it's within the party apparatus. On the local level, there are factional divisions that are allowed, but they're really meaningless. So the form of democracy is maintained in some ways, and in some cases even radically, but it's not a democratic society, even in the way the bourgeois societies are, and they're not as democratic as they like to pretend to be either. What are you left with? And what most socialists who want to defend this shit will do is they'll point out that the bourgeois society is not as democratic as justification for the fact that their weird, hybrid systems are not that democratic, but neither are the ones you live in and call democracy now. So it's not really that bad, So what do we do about that?
Well, I suppose, you can have, it's like one of these classical Marx things that is the form of the essence that's in the world, but it's not true. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What about the class content of the post, communist hellhole, Like,
well, I only heard the last chunk of that, but usually what I say to tanks who say shit like that is like, well, if your idea of socialism is not really better than bourgeois democracy, then why are we doing this?
You know what they'll tell you? Fairness, justice, or equity. Isn't that what they appeal to? It's fairness. I mean, also, which is always ironic to me because, people forget this, but we shouldn't have ever let the fucking libertarians and the capitalists steal freedom from us.
Right. Hardcore agree. Because, you talk to your average person, they're not, like, on board with Stalinism. They just aren't.
What?
Yeah, I know, crazy. But even, like, oftentimes you'll get, like, white-thrilled royalists who are saying, like, who just basically assume that any person of color is just going to, like, be on board with this. And it's just simply not true.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like they haven't looked at the voting patterns of, I don't know, the people of color in the Democrats, much less their likelihood to be social. I mean, like, and I don't want to sound like, that sounds almost reactionary, but it's just like, no, people of color are not a magical unitary block that just automatically has progressive opinions just cause.
Right, they're not homogenous, and that's the thing that these people don't realize, and they treat it as if they're homogenous and that they're good anti-racists, which is ass backwards. They're people,
kind of
it's definitely racist. Like,
let's move it on. Come on. Oh, sorry. Yeah, come on, say something.
Oh, I think it's true that there's like less racists. People of color, quote unquote, are like less likely to be racist or lean right.
Oh yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
But lean right in the sense that they're not going to be Republicans, but like
that doesn't mean they're
right.
They're not going to line up with the people that attack them on racial issues. That stands to reason. Yeah, but it doesn't mean that they end up with the full progressive package, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and even people of color is homogenous in a sense too, because you can have like some Latin American voters who tend to vote Republican based on religious issues, and some who don't. Some who are quite progressive and even revolutionary. So it's not,
or the fact that they're all fleeing from being the ruling class in some fucking country where they fucking destroyed everything.
Yeah,
where the U.S. destroyed everything more or less. I mean, it depends on what country, obviously.
They were the local fucking turncoats or whatever.
You know what?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go out on the limb and say the U.S. didn't need to destroy Venezuela. It would have done a goddamn good job of doing it on its own.
Well, yeah.
Anyway, let's move on. We're so far up the track here. I want to ask this question. Okay.
Yes.
What is he saying here? Lenin and his co-thinkers' transmission of the inheritance of the Second International into Russian politics became Lenin's unique genius on the party question. How?
So
What did you mean by that? I do not understand. It seems like Lenin did the fucking opposite of the Second International.
McNair talks about this earlier in the book, where the theorization on what a party was not really well developed before Kautsky. And it wasn't like Kautsky was the only one who made innovations on this, but basically, like by the time we get to the late 19th century and early 20th century, what we think of as the modern political party was starting to take shape. And Kautsky and Lenin were both good Marxist thinkers on theorizing about this modern form of a political party. I believe that's what he's getting at. And I think that's true. I think we can give Lenin credit for that.
Yeah, but the point being that Lenin copied like 90% of his thought from Kautsky. Like,
right.
And any good Marxist at the time would have done the same, like, or was at least responding to Kautsky. You know, he was like, he was the central thinker on these organizational questions.
And then the basically copy was fucked up. And like,
Lenin actually kind of did what Marx does a lot honestly, like in written practice, where he'll like copy the shit out of some thinker, then like kind of disagree with him about something, blow that up into being a huge big deal and being like, you know what, fuck you, nobody should read you, you're a dick, go to hell. And then, and so all the followers of Marx are like, yeah, I'm not going to read that guy. But then if you picked it up, you realize, oh shit, Marx
really
actually learned a lot from this guy. So like,
I would say that this is like more justifiable for Marx than it is for Lenin, because if we're looking at like Proudhon or Bakunin, there are greater differences between Proudhon, especially Proudhon. There are greater differences between Proudhon and Marx than there are between Lenin and Kautsky. Like Lenin just really took Kautsky, maybe developed it a little bit. Bam, Lenin. I mean, maybe I'm being a bit vulgar, but I don't
it's a bit vulgar because Lenin has like a democratic has a period where he really does take like democracy to be a good.
Right.
Like,
no, that's true.
And like, but yeah, it's in retrospect, it's like questionable how like sincere the commitment is if that wasn't just like a tactical thing.
The ordinary. Yeah, go ahead.
And I also think Lenin's theory of imperialism comes a lot from Hilferding as well. Mm-hmm. Like I think he draws on many writers.
Yeah, but
like
but often he's not like, oh fuck Hilferding, don't read that dick. What are you, some kind of traitor? Don't read that. But that's what happens with Kautsky, right? And so nobody reads Kautsky. Nobody knows that most of Lenin's thought is from Kautsky. Stalin creates a cult of personality around Lenin, and Lenin is thought of as a singular genius when it's not even just that he's amalgamating a lot of sources. It's just like most of his shit is cribbed from Kautsky, like 90%.
Kautsky, the imperialism is Hilferding because that's actually one of the substantive disagreements with Kautsky. And what's fascinating about what I've always found fascinating, but that if you read Kautsky's theory of imperialism and colonialism, like it actually kind of applies to World War II better than the model that Lenin's using in World War I. But he's right in World War I because the conditions are very different, and the conditions being like how dependent these economies are on colonialism.
One thing for people, McNair told me he's working on a book on imperialism.
Oh, that's awesome!
And
interesting.
He's got a big critique on Lenin's imperialism. He thinks Lenin's imperialism is all wrong.
Yeah, me too.
He's written a series of articles in the Weekly Worker that are quite good, critiquing Lenin's imperialism. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Grossman has a really good imperialism theory that he outlays in the third section of Law of Accumulation.
Oh, cool.
It's like super consistent with value theory.
So is it unlike, say, I mean, I don't want to spit on the dead because he just died this week, but like Wallerstein's world systems theory, which doesn't seem consistent with value theory at all.
I don't know. I haven't read Wallerstein, so I can't comment on him.
I have, but my only issue, like, it does, a lot of it makes a sense, but he actually takes nation states as like sui generis actors. He also still sees China as part of the periphery, which is nutty. But beyond that, but to like get into this, it's funny though. The last he gets a dig at the end of this paragraph that I just found humorous that I wanted to point out. Perfectly ordinary Western socialist political divisions, pre-existing the split into the Second International, have been cast in Russian terms, and when communists began to speak a language alien to their broader audiences, the language that has descended into today's trot speak.
Yes, comrade.
God, it's so bad. And if it's not trot, it's mouse speak. But yeah.
Well, yeah.
It's insufferable.
It's really, it has so little value to speak in those terms, because you're taking these reasonable political divisions and then you're mapping them onto this very particular convoluted process of political position swapping that happened within the Bolsheviks in the mid 20th century. And it's like, how is that in any way better than using terms that would be more familiar to people?
I think Stafford Beer has a quote that the function of something is what it does. You know what I mean? I forget exactly what it is, but I think the point is rather clear. It's a form of intellectual domination, and it's an outmoded form of politics. And so people are very attached to this tradition of power, and that this was a way of whipping people into a frenzy like they hadn't seen before, that could turn, a fail-son lawyer into a great man in statues. And so people have reactionary power fantasies associated with this political culture that wears all the skins of the great revolutions,
it really does get into that role-playing aspect of the politics, because you're sort of personalizing political positions and making them into embodied roles, right?
Yeah, there's definitely that. There's also some other weird stuff about it too. I mean, I come out of an organization that I won't name because I don't want to have this fight today, that talks about the entire history in the terms basically of 1917, and actually probably has some pretty hardcore conservative positions, and they do have basically a great man theory of revolution, where there are no we're so regressed, there could never be these great Russian and bourgeois revolutionaries anymore. Marxism is dying because these people don't exist, and the only way it'll be revived is by becoming this pure distillation of our favorite ideologies and speaking this way all the time in a way that sounds to even me religious, even more than
that's every truck group ever.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's a lot of Maoist groups too, because the way they talk about protracted People's War as if it's the second coming of Christ. And I say that like some of the groups like Shining Path literally did talk about it in the same terms of 1,000 years of peace and shit. It's crazy. All right.
Right. I'm going to move on here to the General Staff of the World Revolution. It was getting me all kind of Nostradamus there with 1,000 years of peace. I like the sound of that stuff. It's great. I read Nostradamus when I was 7. That was a bad idea.
What the fuck?
The book... My brother bought some book on Nostradamus, and it had loads of these verses, and I read it. And the book predicted that the world would end in 1999, and it was like 1986 or something when I read it, or 85. And I was like, right. So I've only going to live to the age of 23. I was like, okay. And the Russians are going in. It was saying the Russians would invade and take over Western Europe in 1992. I was like, right, okay. And it was like, so I was saying to myself, I literally was saying to myself, I should really start smoking now because I'm not going to die of cancer. That was my one conclusion from the whole thing.
Anyway, for those who didn't grow up in the 80s, like Tom and I, it's a more fucked up time period than people remember. The amount of weird ass apocalyptic conspiracy mongering was insane. My parents had the same kinds of Nostradamus books, and Michelle remembers and satanic conspiracy shit.
And just how close the LaRouchites were to American power and that point in time.
They really were
mind blowing. They were part of the weirdos at the Reagan court. It's just bizarre.
Wow. Influential American Leninists, huh?
Telling you. Okay, I'm going to move on here. It was literally, it was really normal for kids to be worrying about nuclear holocaust.
Yeah.
That was just you'd be going to bed, you say, say my prayers and hope that the bombs won't land in my head. Totally.
Yeah, it really was.
I talked to Zoomers that are oh man, people never really thought what it was like to be dealing with the end of the world. And I'm like, motherfucker. I felt like I missed the Cold. I felt like I missed the Cold War, but I knew enough about the Cold War to know that people were constantly thinking about the end of the world.
I literally wrote an essay in 2000 about the amount of people I knew who are obsessed either secularly or religiously with the end of the world. And these Zoomers who are like, "Oh, the apocalypse! We're looking at the apocalypse." I'm like, grow up, bucko.
Oh my god.
Like, you are weak. I was raised with locusts and nuclear weapons. You just have climate change. That's slow.
Yeah, but at least no one has to hit any buttons to make this happen. It's just gonna happen with just add physics.
Learn to swim.
Yeah. Hey, nerd.
Girls, you didn't have to deal with the Red Dawn. The Red Dawn and Patrick Swayze fucking with his AK-47s. Motherfuckers. Right. Let's
did Tom and Derick just go full boomer?
Of course they went full boomer.
It's boomer.
Oh yeah. A boomer. Get fucked. Okay.
Technically, I'm a millennial guy.
I don't even know what I am. That's all American. You're PR rubbish.
Rubbish.
American.
You're Irish. You're timeless.
Nobody in Ireland or Europe goes, "Oh yeah, the years I was born has got a particular name made up by some prick on Wall Street."
I gotta move to Ireland.
European chauvinist, Tom.
You hate each other for much more like sensible reasons, like what last name your great grandparents had or something. But
right. Yeah. What you can tell somebody's how they vote by what side of like some fucking civil war they were on. That's the type of politics we have in Europe. That's the shit we want. Right. Yeah, because your stuff is bled. Like people don't really vote with like the two different sides. It's switched in America, hasn't it? Like Republicans is switched to Southern fucking phenomenon.
And although totally interestingly, the politics didn't totally flip though. I mean, part of the thing was like the Southern. Even though the union movement was crushed there, the old Southern racists were conservative as fuck, but they had like a social gospel workerist core left over from like William Jennings Bryan for some weird ass reason. And by the 80s, that was all dead. I mean, but that's why like free college education and our like severely reduced price college education and all that actually happened in the South before the rest of the country. And it hasn't happened in all the country.
Okay.
Anyway, let's
keep going here. Yeah, I really like these couple of paragraphs. I'm gonna read it myself, and then I want to spew some vile. Okay, bile, not vile. I could spew a vile. That'd be interesting. Okay, the General Staff of World Revolution. Trotsky described Comintern as the political general staff of the World Revolution, and the phrase to some extent stuck. The idea of a general staff was in fact taken from the German Imperial Armed Forces. The Prussian Grosser Generalstab had been the first such institution, and the imperial version had conducted the strategic planning that was put into effect in 1914. It carried with it a very centralized concept of command. Imperial General Staff, to a considerable extent, micromanaged the particular fronts. In the latter part of World War I, the Imperial General Staff, headed by Hindenburg and Ludendorff, became the effective government of Germany. This background in Prussian military thought carried with it a willingness in Comintern's leadership to micromanage the national parties. At the very beginning of the Comintern, the Russians pressed their closest German co-thinkers for an early split with the independent Social Democratic Party, the USPD, a decision the German leaders regretted. The ECCI had no hesitation in issuing instructions to the French Communist Party, the PCF, about, for example, the composition of its leadership and the reorganization of its Seine Federation, and pressed the German Communist Party, the KPD, in 1923 to make military preparations for an insurrection. Okay, no, that's enough.
Yeah.
So, basically, they tried to apply what happened in Russia crudely to every goddamn party across Europe. Let's get it straight here, like, Lenin was alive during this time, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to tell you some stories that make this worse, but let's start with Europe, because it's actually even worse than out of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So Lenin is the fella making these decisions here, and he's basically making and forcing them to do exactly what he did, because we got it right in our place, so therefore it has to be exactly the same in all of your countries, even though I'm not from France or Germany. I'm from Russia, and I know more than all of ye.
Yeah,
And
He makes this argument explicit in left-wing communism and infantile disorder.
and this is a disaster. It's a
Absolutely.
strategy, not a total disaster.
Yeah,
This is what I could point to when you get like when I'm talking to like neo-Leninists or like people who are like left Leninists or largely types, and they want to separate Lenin from Stalin, right? And this is the kind of stuff that you could point to very easily. It's like right there in our history and say, well, actually, you got to transplant them a little bit. This Lenin laid the groundwork for everything bad that happened, and I don't think he wanted that, but the way that they just assumed that civil war was imminent, and then they created a militarized party and then exported that everywhere. That wasn't Stalin, that was Lenin. And you need to take responsibility for that, and they refuse to. And I understand why, because anarchists tend to be very moralistic and just treat him like he's a monster who eats everyone or whatever. But, the Cold War's over. You don't have to think like that. You can think rationally about this, and Lenin fucked up.
Yeah, but Soro was right, and Lenin is a meme, and that's the basis on which these people are dealing. I'm not kidding. This is the basis on which people are dealing with Lenin, is that he embodies all like the myth of the big revolution that cleanses it all. He ends up embodying the actual heroic sacrifice of many, hundreds of thousands of syndicalists and socialists and communists and anarchists and whatever. He gets to embody that, and that's what he means to those people, and to the people tearing him down and to the people building him up. Very few of them are dealing with Lenin as a figure.
But okay, let's really get into how bad this fucked things up, though. Okay, like, has anyone read Jacobi's Dialectic of Defeat? There's one chapter where he goes into like what Zinoviev was doing under Lenin's orders to not just the USPD, all right, but also to the communist parties. Like they played left comms and regular comms off of each other to the extent that there may have been a chance for a second like slow revolution later on in the 20s. And frankly, Zinoviev killed it. They also did that in the United States. So
that's terrible.
Like they totally, I mean, like if you know the life story of John Reed, it gets into this. But like they totally and there are a lot of shitty elements in the SPA. But like they totally fuck with Zinoviev has Reed, and they play all these sides to basically become the front party for the Bolsheviks in the States with some allegiance. So they play all these factions coming out of the SPD against each other, and that leads to like the De Leonists. It leads to another group. Eventually they form their own party, the CPUSA, which immediately has its own internal problems because of it. Actually, it does a lot of good work in the South and starts really kind of focusing on racial issues and this is in the late Lenin Stalin period, and then immediately gets fucked when they issue orders for them to like don't criticize the Democrats ever because we have to make this United Front work, or Popular Front work, actually not United Front. This is all tied up in that history, and this is directly to that time period. It wasn't just here. I mean, it wasn't just in Europe. It was all over the place. They did it in China, too.
No, the Chinese story is one of the most grisly.
Like,
right.
Yeah, like it's super bad what they did in China. Zhou Enlai and Mao just kind of survived by luck, and because Mao was a sycophant, frankly, for Stalin. But like, they were purging. They would like call people up to the Comintern meeting and shoot them. So like it's like McNair's actually underplaying how bad this was. And what makes me super mad is people don't point out, we don't talk about the neo-Leninists, but like the Trotskyists came up with this structure. Trotsky came up with this structure. It was like, it wasn't just Lenin. This is Trotsky too.
Yeah. Trotsky writes a lot of nice stuff after it's relevant, like Obama or something. But, when he had the power, what he did makes that stuff hypocritical. It's insightful in a way that reflects what he did wrong.
So, like, we've gone through some of the stuff here about like the poor strategy of like doing the Russian Revolution, and it being kind of doomed because it was a terrible time to do it for Germany because all the left in Germany was split and it fucked up its own stuff with the war. And now we've gone and pushed this terrible idea into all of world commie fucking parties. So can someone explain to me exactly why Lenin is supposed to be this great thinker?
I mean, even a lot of his enemies, like a lot of his enemies from this time period, end up like still calling themselves Leninists. Like Bordiga, who's actually more Leninist than Lenin. Like one of the reasons I was initially into him was that during this time period, and also later in Stalin's time period, and I mean, you got to admire a man who had these kind of balls. He resisted the Bolsheviks being able to do this to the Italian party, and to the point to where like he told Stalin off to his face at a Comintern meeting and survived.
Yeah, he's the last Western communist to do that. He's called him the gravedigger of the revolution to his face. It's
to
pretty
his face. I mean, it's hard. I mean, like, you know, say what you say about Borgidis, but like that's. And he was principled on this because Bordiga, who like was a party authoritarian in ways that like even most Stalinists aren't, frankly, but he was insistent that each of the national groupings within communism would have to parse a lot of this stuff out organically within its own, you know, cultural space. And it also is ironic given how many people like Bordiga who are like anti-national liberation and stuff, because he was actually huge on like not just nations but cultures being able to like suss out what a lot of this looks like for themselves as long as they're abolishing the value form.
So someone answer me, like what is why Lenin? Why is he so admired? Apart from the fact that they managed to hold it together for a while, like what's the key?
The key is really a cult of personality.
Yeah, it's Stalin. Really, Stalin builds up the image of Lenin.
There's got to be something more to it than that.
No, I also am going to agree with Tom because
Sorel says the rest. I already kind of pointed to the butthole reasons for this, but the person who enacts the cult in history is Stalin.
Right. Well, that's true, but and also the Trotskyists become the main opposition to Stalin, but they also share the Lenin worship. And so much so that Trotsky also actually downplays his historical disagreements with Lenin and in ways.
It's a standard power grabbing. Like, you know, when George Washington dies, you know, everyone is going to be like, yeah, I knew Washington. Oh, you know, we weren't that like at loggerheads. Me and George Washington, we were buddies. You know, like it's a play to legitimacy. And Stalin did this the best. Stalin was always like, me, I'm but a humble student. Me? No, I'm but a follower. The follower of the great teacher Lenin. What did the great teacher Lenin say? I'm going to just fucking quote this for like a page.
Right. I mean, and like he would even do stuff that Lenin, like at least in the 30s, in the 40s, he starts deviating. But he would even do stuff that he didn't agree with Lenin on. He'd still do it.
Right.
And that's also not addressed by the only thing that, I mean, like if you read Lenin's Last Testament, Lenin does seem to have sincerely wanted democratization of some variety, but he didn't spell out how he wanted it. And also he shit talked every single one of his people. Like he also seems like a legitly terrible person to be a comrade with.
Oh,
like nobody ends up like he I mean, he doesn't kill them. And so there's that, which is, you know, better than Stalin. But I mean, like read what he has to say about Zinoviev and Stalin and Trotsky. I mean, he doesn't even have good things to say about Trotsky in a lot of ways. I mean, like, he's just kind of a douche.
Even in the Last Testament, where it is most notable for him dunking on Stalin, he dunks on Trotsky too, really. Not as hard, but he does. I mean, it's hard. I used to, you know, when I was trying to be a Leninist also, like, I would often use the Last Testament to, like, separate Lenin from Stalin as well. He could have tried to do that before he got sick. You know, like, you could have tried a little bit harder, my dude, to be democratic, and you didn't. You did everything the opposite of that, and it's your fault.
Yeah,
and maybe he was feeling regret. Like it feels like there's like regret in his words, and there's other things that I've read that wasn't in the Last Testament. That seems like he regretted a lot of what he did and what happened. I think you saw the writing on the wall. You know.
Yeah, I know that. I know that. Like Iron Felix too, also was like that. Iron Felix regretted a lot of what he felt like he had to do. I mean, the old Bolsheviks do come up. They do all of them in a way. I mean, except for it's hard to like Molotov because fucker survived so long. But like dude, literally, like even though he loved his wife, like was willing to like be a toady on that too. So I can't say, but everybody else comes off as a tragic figure. But all of them are shitty. The left opposition was shitty too. Zinoviev's a real shit. Zinoviev did so much fucked up stuff to the European Communist parties, like personally, by giving bad advice and bad directives and playing people off of each other knowingly and stuff like that. I mean, like, when you read this history, I don't know how you come up with a rosy view of all this. And I'm done.
Before we move on, I just wanted to address this point about the general staff, right? This concept comes from the idea of the Prussian general staff. I just wanted to note that, like, the idea of a general staff as an organizational form in even the military domain is, like, pretty hotly disputed, right? Because you get these kinds of problems in militaries that use one, right? Where you have a general staff that's usually viewed as quite arrogant, they micromanage, and it causes all kinds of problems. If you actually, like, read about the military history of, like, the Second World War, the ways in which Hitler, like, made these problems even worse in terms of how he managed the German military and the invasion of Russia, it's hard to come away from, like, this sort of theory of organization and think it's really a great way to organize either their military efforts or political efforts. And furthermore, like, yeah, if you look at sort of, Stafford Beer's theory about cybernetics, it's exactly the opposite of what he thinks makes an effective organization. For some of the reasons that you were talking about, Derick, with Bordiga, Bordiga's objections would kind of rhyme with what Beer would say about that.
Yeah, Stafford Beer is the only person to have ever spelled out something that seems like it gets to the point of what Bordiga is trying to articulate by organic centralism. That, like, you have, like, a sort of network of things based on the sort of emergent conditions, and you have, like, a body in the middle that essentially only intervenes when there's, like, a pain signal, you might say, like when there's something that can't be managed at that level. That's like
you even see this in, like, the, like, military literature that is responding to the idea of the general staff. Right. Because, fighting a war is a pretty intense test of your theory. There's certainly ways in which these things persist despite failures, just as they do in politics, but there are critiques that come up.
Yeah, I know a lot about that. Unfortunately, but Bordiga's a lot vaguer, and he has an authoritarian view of the party.
Yeah.
But within the party, he has a very nebulous. I mean, he frankly a technocratic, because he thinks these networks will create technocrats that can just make informed decisions that aren't political, because he hates politics, and that they would be like ways to adjust this based on inputs from central planning committees and ration problems and stuff like that. So in some ways, Bordiga is, like, way more authoritarian, but he does seem to see these, like, overly teleologically oriented things. I mean, and I want to make this explicit. Even down to engineering, this general staff central teleological form. I mean, like, as I hate Deleuze, but Deleuze makes a very good point about this. This was debated on and decided on in, like, 1919. Like, they decided that society needed to be centrally, and not just centrally planned, but centrally organized around the Central Committee and the quote-unquote general staff of the Revolution and the Proletariat, which would represent the dictatorship of the proletariat. And that this went down to, like, how they set up plumbing, which means these systems are hyper efficient, but also super fucking fragile. Like, so anyone who, like, does any kind of system analysis can see, like, oh, it doesn't take a whole lot to make all this fail, and thus also make, like, dumbass, like, oh, the knowledge problem stuff seem legitimate, because you have a hyper efficient but hyper fragile structural mechanism. And by the way, companies do this too, and also fail for this very reason.
Okay, Pouya, do you want to read this section? I think we should move on.
Okay, if it had been the case.
Any objections to moving on? Are people finished?
I'm done.
Go for it.
If it had been the case that Europe was on the verge of generalized civil war, the creation of a European-wide military command structure capable of giving orders to national movements would have been entirely justified. In war, that is to go beyond guerrilla harassment of the enemy and take hold of territory. and hold territory, yeah. It is necessary to have a centralized command. It is also sometimes necessary for units to sacrifice themselves in diversionary attacks that will enable victory elsewhere, or, for that matter, in attacks that will lead to breakthroughs by attrition. It might have thus have been justified to wager the KPD on the possibility that a breakthrough in Germany would bring down the whole European state system. Trotsky certainly went on thinking this for the rest of his life, blaming the KPD leadership for fumbling the crisis of 1923. There were two underlying problems. The first was that war is a continuation of politics by other means. War is not reducible to politics, nor politics to war. Creating a top-down military command structure in the Russian Communist Party, Comintern, and other communist parties tended to eliminate or subordinate the local and sectoral mediations that link a workers' party to its broader working-class constituency and feedback on the center of the political ideas and mood current in this constituency. It has thus reduced both the Communist parties and the Comintern's ability to form political judgments that necessarily underlie decisions from military action. Second, the Communists were nowhere near having political majority support in Europe or even in Germany. The task of the Communists once the revolutionary wave of 1919 to 1920 had ebbed was, as the Comintern recognized at the third and fourth Congresses, to win a political majority. It was not to launch a civil war. A general staff of a world revolution was therefore inappropriate. The military centralist character of the Comintern had the practical effect of making the leaderships of the communist parties dependent on the Comintern center in Moscow. This took the form of material dependence in the case of small communist parties such as the CPGB, which received subsidies from Moscow, and equally those parties that were illegal, so that the party leadership was located in Moscow. But it was equally present in stronger communist parties such as the KPD and PCF. The democratic centralist character of the Comintern, within the terms of 1920 to 1921 idea of democratic centralism, had the effect that the leaders of these parties were answerable and removable by the Comintern Center. They could not both be in this position and answerable and be answerable and to removable by their membership. The problem was accentuated by the fact that the relation to the Comintern Center in Moscow was necessarily clandestine. In the first place, if the KPD or CPGB openly took orders from Moscow, prosecution would follow. All the more if, as in Germany in 1923, the orders were to prepare and launch for an insurrection. Second, because it was based in Moscow, the Comintern Center lacked the sort of legitimacy that had been possessed by the General Council of the First International or by the Congress of a Second. It was all too easy to accuse it of being merely an instrument of a Russian state. Should I continue? Okay.
Just do this last little paragraph and we'll stop there.
Okay. Clandestinity means secrecy, and secrecy meant that the members had been even less of a chance of holding the leaders to account than would have been the case if there had been open and transparent subordination of the leaders of the communist parties to the International Center. There was no chance in this regime of Western communist parties resisting the development of open bureaucratic tyranny in the USSR and the accompanying generation of a Comintern.
Now,
I guess
who wants to come in now?
This opens a can of worms for me, and Lexi can speak to it too, because we were a member of a party that actually tried to implement their structure off of the exact constitutional structure or charter structure of the CPGB PCC, which is the organization and sect that McNair is in. They still are structured around this terror cell military cadre model to this day, even after this book was written. And I now am like, why? I mean, after reading this, the other thing that I thought was interesting is particularly after Kyle's comments, that McNair actually takes a whole lot of stuff that's contested in general military strategy as just a fact based off of 19th century war models. You do have to have a central command and diversionary tactics. Yeah, sure. But the central command doesn't have to be structured that centrally. And with that, with that hyper central command structure, I mean, honestly, the U.S. military isn't.
They're that's probably one of the biggest counterexamples to the general staff model, right?
Well, on top of that too, And then I think even McNair himself said this earlier, but like the whole idea of like Marxist republicanism or even like Lenin in State and Revolution is that you have like a workers' militia where it's the armed working class itself and not like a special body of people. So if he's arguing that like it's logical to have like a top-down command structure in a military sense, in that general staff sense, right, in a period of civil war, that seems to contradict what he was saying before, unless I'm misunderstanding something.
Well, I mean, I think also we have to remember in their conception, like the revolution and the Civil War might not be the exact same thing.
Sure, but
in the Bolshevik model, it wasn't. I mean, the actual Bolshevik seizure in October was like kind of easy.
Yeah, correct. But I guess what I'm saying though is that like the way a dictatorship of the proletariat is structured in like the libertarian Leninist conception or like neo-Leninist or, you know, communist Republican, whatever, is that you have you just have a working class militia and officers are elected. And so the general staff model that McNair seems to think is
necessary during the Civil War is contradicted by his revolutionary model. Like,
there's a good reason for that. It's because of the performance of those kind of armies in the Civil War, right? Those armies didn't always fight the most efficiently.
Yeah, that's true, but they won the American Revolution.
Yeah, no. You're right. But this is the calculation that gets made in order to hold on to power at the expense of the democratic character of the revolution.
What I'm pointing out, though, and maybe I am the anti-McNairist of the group, is he's inconsistent in ways that capitulate a lot of the main points back to traditional Leninism while he's trying to critique it. He's radically inconsistent if you read this closely.
I mean, yeah, I tend to agree, actually. I don't think... I still see a lot of value in this text, but I see value at it with a side of salt, if you will.
I guess the thing I see that's really problematic from a strategic point of view is that like he does sort of take up this kind of Clausewitzian idea of like attrition warfare, and that really does seem to be the model that like the Western European communist parties took and was not effective. So like if you're seeing that as your model for strategy, I don't think this is it.
I mean, basically, it's basing 20th century war models into turning them into political models, and then those early 19th century war models are also just wrong now to contemporary things anyway.
Yep.
Like I keep on being like I hate to say this, but like motherfucker needs to read The War Nerd.
Yeah.
Like
War Nerd understands the rhizome.
Right, and it also understands like these attrition models when they work and don't work. So, for example, in insurgencies and like in anti-imperial insurgencies where you're fighting a foreign occupier, they work, kind of. If you're willing to take 4 times the deaths of the occupier, okay, so you got to sacrifice 75% of your army. But they do not work in traditional civil wars. Actually, believe it or not, like they don't. In traditional civil wars, in which case the odds of the people who currently hold the state winning in an attrition model is even when, like, even if you look at, for example, I don't know, the U.S. Civil War, it's going to always favor the fucking current state. Like, always, actually. So that's a terrible model.
And we see this in the way the left fails politically, right? Even outside of the Leninist dimension, that these attritional tactics are adopted against a more organized and entrenched enemy.
Right. And like, honestly, they're deluded. I mean, like, this is like marching a group of army ants against the goddamn U.S. military, effectively. I mean, it's the ways in which it's deluded and anachronistic and like not materially rooted. And look, I got in an argument with someone who I'm not going to name that so I don't start shit today about militancy. And it was a very mild argument, but they basically believe that militancy, the reason why they value militancy is it wins, and it's based off of this attrition model, right? But they also kind of believe militancy is like not quite an ideological position, but kind of like a strategic orientation based on an ideological position, which I find to be hilarious because one thing you'll notice about modern armies, they're not militant in an ideological way at all.
Right.
At all.
Mm-hmm.
No,
Like,
it's an antiquarian form of militancy. What they crave is listen, what they want is a kind of repression. You know, they want some kind of like, they want that. They want a good reason for it. They can't do it without like a good integrated reason. They would never make it in the modern army. It's not ideological in that way.
Right,
they want a full integrated warrior monk experience.
right. Like when I actually would point out to people who talk this way, and this wasn't a different conversation, like, well, why don't you do what the right wing does and join the military to get the tactical training? One of the things that you'll notice from those of us who have any kind of violence training that's gone through a formal, like, for me, it's like very mild. It's mostly like non-lethals and stuff. But for other people that I know who are like former soldiers, they're the least militant people in the goddamn group. Like almost
100%.
universally. Like it's like
for good reason.
Right. And
for good reason. If you've tasted that world, you don't want to like dwell in it unless there's something wrong with you.
Right. So like this model is like, it's not just politically deleterious, frankly, it's personally deleterious. This will fuck you up in the Children's Crusade.
Who wants to take the last little bit?
I'm good. Just a little technical difficulty. All right.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I didn't notice you popped out.
I haven't read
Lexi.
anything yet.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Sophie. Thought you'd done already.
Nope.
Sophie, do you want to take the last bit then?
Sure. Can you make the text bigger, please?
I kind of can't. You seem to fuck up when I do.
Oh, never mind then. I guess if you can make the sidebar go away with all the people there, that made it bigger.
Okay. Oh,
can you make the window bigger? If you make the window bigger, it gets visible.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Sophie, you could do it too. Like just stretch
There,
your window.
But you see, it cuts it off. It's a problem with my drive. Let me open.
Then like do what you had it. Do it the way you had it before. It's fine. Sorry.
Oh, just give me a second. It's going to take me a second now to get. We can. You want to sing a song? I've been trying to.
I'm trying to find my physical copy of that book myself. When you guys went live and all you could see my butt, that's what I was looking for. But since I recently moved,
that's why you were mooning, Derick, is it?
Yeah. I was just mooning you all because I was looking for McNair. Here's my ass. No,
I thought that was just an ingenious Patreon strategy.
Yeah.
Galaxy brain sexiness.
Yeah.
We need a Derick twerking next time.
Twerking.
Well, I mean, Patreon is the cam girl model of business. So
it is
100% is.
Yes, that's from the Lexi K School of Economics.
All right.
Derick's private Snapchat.
Oh my God.
Hey, capitalist sexuality in Capital Volume 2. Let's find it.
Major. Okay. Hit
All
it,
right.
Pouya.
In
Oh, it's not
1990,
Pouya.
Yeah.
What?
Sophie.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sophie.
Sophie, yeah.
Damn it, Tom. In 1920, there was a West European Bureau of the Comintern based in Amsterdam. It turned out that the left communists had a majority, and their split brought it to an end. The bureau was overlapped and was succeeded by an equally short-lived Western European Secretariat based in Berlin, involving at least Radek and Levi. A Central European Secretariat was slightly more long-lasting. The short life of these organizations reflected the fact that the military or Bonapartist character of centralism in 1921 was counterposed to them. Horizontal connections between neighboring parties and subcenters would inevitably compromise the pure centralism of the international. There were scroll down, please. Compromise the pure centralism of the international. They were to be the parties and the international center. The structural forms reinforce the idea of separate national revolutions. The formal horizontal collaborations might identify concrete common political features or common tasks. The same could, the same would be true of intermediary levels of organizations such as European, or by analogy, Latin American or Pan-African conferences and leading committees. Within national parties, such intermediary structures are common, although bureaucratic centralism tends to close them down or turn them into mere transmission belts for the center. Channeling everything through Moscow had the effect, in contrast, that there could only be national tasks and global tasks, and global tasks were defined by the view from Moscow.
Can I just say that, like, this is the way that the Spanish Empire was organized in South America, and it, in the wake of the collapse of the center, it led to a complete inability of the different colonies to cooperate in any way. Like this is like a absolutely terrible way to run any kind of democratic organization.
We should just do this again, though, right? I mean, we just got to do this again. It'll work this time.
I think so.
Praise London.
Yeah. What does he mean here by this stuff here? Horizontal connections between neighbouring parties and sub-centres would inevitably compromise the pure centralism of the international. What does he mean by that?
I think he was talking about like the different splits that happened in that context.
And I think it means like, well, I also think it means like the party just, or it wouldn't be as centralized because you have to, the leaders then have to be accountable to the other party in a different country or so, wherever it is.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is the communist like world republic model. It means that like centralization would have limits.
Yeah, I mean, like if you have cross connections between national parties, then they're going to be able to set their own agendas, right, and be accountable to each other. Which seems like a pretty basic thing you would need for any kind of meaningful internationalism. But
so, like, why isn't there like a Democratic Socialists of Canada, like in the way that there's a DSA? Is there some kind of like?
It's group? Because the NDP exists,
right? Is there any like? I don't know. Is there any like synergy or like organizational like fraternization?
Yeah, there was. It was called the SI, and it sucked. So the DSA left. Now there's nothing. But they didn't try to replace it with anything either.
Well, that's on the international level. I'm talking about just like across the border, eh? Like.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about like international connections between the Canadian left and the DSA, is what you're saying?
Right, like, and on like, I don't know, like maybe the United States is more different than Mexico than from Canada, but in a politically speaking, there would be a need to like cooperate across the border.
So I guess the thing about the organization of the NDP is that the leadership is far less radical than the membership. And so there is actually meaningful cross-border collaboration between the NDP and the American left, but it is between party hacks in the NDP and the Democratic Party.
Right.
And that's the connection. Like,
because they have actual goals. Right.
Like the election that was run here in Alberta recently was basically on the Hillary Clinton electoral model. And that's cross-border political solidarity.
Oh, wow, yeah.
The American left and
yeah, let's make the Clinton 2016 campaign. Let's Bolshevize that. Let's export that throughout the world. That's and
it worked just about as well. It was a landslide victory for the right, and I'm not happy about it.
Yeah, but to say like Snow Canada had an NDP government for a little while. Which surprised everybody, and then they were terrible. Like they were chauvinistic about Albertan politics. They
basically resurrected the energy industry, the oil industry in Alberta, did everything they possibly could to strengthen them.
So they were smokestack yellow card workerist for fucking like Alberta nationalism. What the weak tea fucking nationalism is like? I'm gonna be
weak tea
for my.
That's like almost social fascist at this point. This is
it was like so they antagonized all the other provincial parties of the NDP and the National Party, especially the party in British Columbia, because they were trying to ram through an oil pipeline to the Pacific that the British Columbia NDP, which was also in power, did not accept. And they basically, they just used right-wing talking points.
Doesn't make you want to run to Canada to escape Trump people? I mean, like, for real, though.
Yeah, it was such a disaster. And it honestly was like a pretty transformative experience for me personally in terms of seeing like, I'm not really down with sort of national oriented socialism because that chauvinism was so catastrophic that I can hardly even begin to understand how that leads to meaningful socialism.
The DSA of Texas was like Texo-chauvinist. And I say that because it's like it literally is the equivalent. And since Texas does have like a Republican history of its own for, I don't know, for a couple of months or something.
Yeah, but that would be like kind of like a white supremacist politic. It would be hard to do that outside.
Did you realize that like the communists went out to Portland were not opposed to the Klan? I'm just like pointing that out. Like,
damn it.
It is these unfortunate instances of history that our anti-communist woke liberal overlords are actually kind of right about.
Yeah, for sure.
So like, and also, and seriously, it is why a lot of the particularly I'm not gonna say people of color, I'm gonna say black community doesn't really trust the white socialist movement and the Democratic Party. Like, for real, it's related to this.
Yeah, and I guess I will just so I'm not starting super tons of beef here. Like, there were positive things the Alberta NDP did. They tried to organize the agricultural workers, which was like really going out on a limb. It was a failure, but they tried. They raised the minimum wage significantly. They did some things for LGBTQ rights, which are all getting reversed now that they've lost and the Tories are in power, and the reaction is going to be twice as bad as what it would have been otherwise. It's just, you look at the positive things they did, and it's really hard to sort of appreciate them as positive things when the defeat that came out of this is going to be so crushing for working people. Yeah.
Is the left in Alberta like doubling down though on it to defend it now that they're in opposition mode, like the Democrats?
Yeah. What they're doing is they're partially just sort of pointing to the perfidy and the lies and the corruption of the Conservatives. And then the other thing they're doing is they're organizing budget town halls to sort of like point out or make the conservative cuts agenda a public issue. Those are the things they're doing. I feel like the second one is something that the Democrats wouldn't do, but the first one is definitely something the Democrats would do.
Democrats would do the second one. The Democrats would do on a local level, but not on a national one, and then it depends on the locality. But just to bring this point out, man, like these horizontal connections between neighboring parties, sub-centers would inevitably compromise the pure centralists of the international. We'd also have to deal with all this shit. Like, could you imagine like trying to get like the Brooklyn DSA to like actually deal with like the Alberta NDP in a real like I can't even get the Brooklyn DSA to like talk like really deal with like the southern and western chapters of the DSA, much less like.
Look, everybody knows that Nuke Brooklyn is first on my program, but the point is, I just want communists. I just want comrades. I just want Buffalo, New York comrades to smoke weed with Toronto comrades right now, like just as a start. That's a start. That's the second point of my platform. Okay.
All right.
Buffalo, New York people, you can escape some of the fallout in Canada and smoke some weed.
But surely we should be nuking Connecticut then as well. Come on now.
Yeah, for sure. Let me just I'll gather my things.
Get your stuff. Grab your stuff. On this episode, you heard the theme tune, The Order of the Pharaonic Jesters, and The Night of the Purple Moon by Sun Ra and his orchestra. Thank you for listening, and please join me for the next episode of From Alpha to Omega. This show is a member of the Emancipation Network, a Marxist podcast and research collective. Make sure to check out our network's sister podcasts, General Intellect Unit and Swampside Chats.